Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Melita Pachuli, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar organized by the Stockholm Center for Research and Innovation Security at the Institute for Security and Development Policy. Thank you all for joining us for the 8th webinar in our Research and Innovation series. Through this series, the Center brings together policymakers, researchers, and practitioners to discuss one of the fastest growing policy areas today, which is research and innovation security. Over the past few years, research security has moved from being a relatively niche topic to becoming a major policy priority across Europe and beyond. How can we protect sensitive research and critical technologies while maintaining the openness that has long been the foundation of scientific excellence? How can universities continue to benefit from international collaboration while addressing growing concerns about foreign interference and unwanted knowledge transfer? To discuss today's discussion focuses on Germany, one of Europe's leading research and innovation powers. Germany has recently been at the center of important debates on research security, particularly following discussions surrounding the CISPA Helmond Center for Information Security case, which highlighted the complex balance between academic openness, national security, and international cooperation. We are therefore very pleased to have with us today Dr. Alicia Hennig, ISDP's Associated Senior Research Fellow, who will help us better understand how Germany's approach to research and innovation security is developing, what lessons can be drawn from recent events, and what these experiences may mean for universities and policymakers across Europe and beyond. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to briefly mention the format of today's discussion. Alicia will begin with a 20-minute presentation. This will be followed by a moderated discussion, and then after which we will open the floor for questions from the audience. We encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A session function throughout the session. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Dr. Alicia Hennig is an external lecturer at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland and an expert on research security, business ethics, and international scientific cooperation. She previously served as interim professor of business ethics at the Technical University of Dresden and spent over 5 years working in China in academia and business. Her work focuses on China-related research security challenges and has informed institutions including the NATO Science and Technology Board and the FBI Counterintelligence Division. Her work has been featured in major German media outlets including Der Spiegel and the Süddeutsche Zeitung. I also had the pleasure of interviewing Alicia together with the SDP Senior Fellow David Beeks earlier this year. The interview titled Resilient Silence, Transatlantic Challenges and Opportunities. It is available on our website for anyone interested in exploring this topic further. We will also publish her pieces like in the coming months, and it will be also published on our website. Alicia, thank you very much for joining us today. We are delighted to have you with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Melita. Thanks for having me. And I will just put the presentation I've prepared for today on display. Just a second. Oh, wait. So. Okay, I guess the presentation is visible, right? Yeah, so today I would like to use the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the CISPA case. It's been one of the, let's say, latest of a string of scandals, so to say. We didn't have so many, but we had like 5, 6 cases over the past 2 years roundabout related to, or the question of whether these institutions have poor research security or not. And so CISPA is particularly relevant because CISPA is not a university, it's a research organization external to a university. It belongs to one of the largest research organizations we have in Germany, it's the Helmholtz Association. And the CISPA is an abbreviation for Center, as Melita already said, Center for Information Security. And when we talk about this in relation to PRC research cooperation, I think we all understand that this could be a very fine line to balance, and it's generally a very sensitive topic for collaboration with the People's Republic of China. And so this is what I'm going to talk about today, and also the implications of this case. So as I mentioned, the CISPA belongs to Helmholtz Center, and they were originally independently founded from Helmholtz in a collaboration with Saarbrücken University, Saarland University, sorry. And they were funded by the Ministry of Education and Research. Back then, BMBF is today the Ministry of Research, Technology and Space, BMFTR. And then in 2017, it became a research center under the roof of Helmholtz Association, which is, as I mentioned, one of the leading research organizations we have in Germany. Like Helmholtz is huge. And then Professor Michael Backes, who is also at the center of this controversy, became the director of the center, and he's also a researcher of the center. And a lot of reporting has the reporting we had so far has mostly focused on him as a person and what he's doing under the roof of CISPA. But of course, not everyone at CISPA, I suppose, is happy with this framing, because the CISPA in itself is already a larger research center, and only because Mr. Backes is like leading it, other people are, of course, negatively affected now because it's been in the news and all over the place. And still, there are, of course, research groups that do, reliable and probably more secure research. But there are also outliers. And there are two particular research groups that have been identified as outliers in that sense when it comes to neglecting security concerns. And one is led by Mr. Backes himself. So that is how this kind of controversy evolved. And we had the media reporting, which was mainly driven by Handelsblatt. Mid of June, they pitched the first article, and the accusation was mainly that, that CISPA is actually co-financing the People's Republic's like military upgrade, essentially. And their accusations were based on the following allegations. So I've listed the allegations here because it's important to understand what they are accused of, because then I will explain, according to my research, what is actually the issue with this center. So what Handelsblatt found out was that there was funding from the PRC for allegedly individual sensitive funding projects, and that also implied that researchers here in Germany potentially benefited from this PRC funding. The second allegation was that there was research cooperation with 5 of the 7 sons of national defense, the Tietze universities in China, that are directly linked to the defense complex. The third allegation was that the Handelsblatt authors have identified 22 organizations with which the co-authors, so the Chinese co-authors, have links with, that are subject to SASTIN, so the State Administration of Science, Technology and Industry for Defense, which is a subordinate civilian agency under the PRC's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. And so this subordinate civilian agency oversees the is linked to the universities and has actually designated research areas that are linked with defense more specifically. So the fourth point is that Handelsblatt identified 123 publications between 2020 and 2025 that are involving and originating from Chinese individuals at problematic universities, and these publications are security relevant. With problematic universities, the authors meant like those universities that are listed under SASTIN's oversight. And the last allegation is that 2 sub-research groups, which I mentioned, consist mainly of Chinese researchers. So one is the research group by Mr. Backes, and the other one is by his Chinese colleague. Mr. Backes, I think, has one non-Chinese member in his group, and his Chinese colleague has 0 non-Chinese members in his research group. Think about like 10 to 15 to up to 20 researchers in these two groups, respectively. So, and then for your information, just like the timeline of accusations, because that was the initial article, but there was a follow-up of articles and reactions, of course. And so the original article, the initial article was on 18th of June. And then on 19th of June, so right the next day, right, the German party, the CDU was calling for action over this controversial cooperation, and the Federal Ministry of Research, Research, Technology and Space was calling for an explanation, of course. And CISPA naturally took the stance first to reject these allegations regarding its cooperation with China. And so then you can see like it's a typical case of crisis communication, or generally a crisis evolving. Is like you have more players getting into this, right? So the Ministry of Research intervened. They've planned a special audit of the CISPA now, of course, in light of these allegations. And then we have the Federal Office of Information Security, the BSI, also criticizing CISPA because one of their members has been on the board of CISPA. So then it goes on later with like Mr. Bacchus, due to also the investigations that have been meanwhile initiated being put on temporary leave. We have the Helmholtz president himself telling us he's concerned about the CISPA's reputation. And then it goes further with like the former Wirecard investigator. So I don't know whether you know about the Wirecard scandal. It's been the largest German fintech startup scandal we ever had. But I think also Wirecard was the only fintech in Germany that ever got like a global reputation ever. But there was a lot of fraud around this company, and eventually they, of course, had to investigate it. And KPMG did the main investigation of Wirecard, and these investigators have then been assigned now to the CISPA case. So they are supposed to conduct a special audit, but we do not have audit results yet. To me, like the question ultimately is, what can they investigate? Obviously, it cannot be anything related to research security because that's not the background. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect from this investigation, to be honest, but I think it's important that there at least is a group of people looking into certain processes, I guess. Yeah, and then of course, and that's a very important issue, the state funding may be dependent on the audit results, right? So this is now how we understand that if research organizations obviously demonstrate poor research security, they may not be funded by the government anymore. And the CISPA is 100% funded by public resources, so. And then also like by the end of July, Helmholtz started to restructure like security related research. They don't only have the CISPA, and so probably in light of the CISPA case, they understood that when they do such research, it should perhaps, be reorganized and structured along different lines, and maybe not with research groups that are 100% Chinese nationals. So. But I also found some blind spots in the media reporting. What I found was that there is there's a stronger focus on science espionage. So the Handelsblatt journalists were talking about knowledge outflow. I personally find this term very difficult because an outflow implies that something is flowing away, so we have less of it, or it's leaving our source entirely, right? And in terms of knowledge, that cannot be true because knowledge is immaterial. Like when they get our knowledge, we still have the knowledge too, right? So for me, like the more appropriate terminology generally is transfer, knowledge transfer and technology transfer. But anyhow, the whole story, in my view, was more focused on the espionage part or potential espionage and possibly hacking part of this than on the transfer part. The second thing is that I felt there's generally a lack of understanding at the side of the journalists what knowledge and technology transfer actually means as another like kind of cause of outflow of knowledge and technology. There's also generally a lack of understanding how funding in the PRC works, because funding in the PRC will never reach us here. Funding in the PRC is strictly limited to PRC researchers. So when I do a collaboration with someone on the Chinese side at a Chinese institution, and this person is funded, I here in my country will never see any of this money. It's only the researcher or the entire research project of this researcher in China that gets funded by the PRC. So the money could have never reached anyone here. I don't think that could be the case from what I know how research actually works in China. Then there's been also an inadequate generalization because, yes, SASTINT is obviously overseeing a number of universities. ASPI has a whole article on this, how many universities these are and stuff. But then, I mean, just consider you do collaboration with someone at such a university, but you do it in a completely different field that is not designated and not monitored or doesn't have oversight by SASTINT. I mean, in my view, then the argument at least is lacking strength. And then the last thing is also the role of PRC talent programs is entirely overlooked, similarly to the topic of transfer. So these are my concerns about the reporting because it's framing the entire discussion here, and important issues like the transfer and the talent programs are entirely overlooked. So what actually matters is, in my view, that the SAPS research groups are actually, in my view, a PRC talent pipeline, because you have 15 to 20 Chinese talents, of course. They are capable people, no doubt about this. They come over here to study, to learn, to do their PhD, to do their postdoc, to be a visiting scholar. But on the other hand, especially when they do their PhD and postdoc here, in light of that the CISPA is fully funded by public money, I feel like, well, maybe we should have more diversity generally in such research groups, but also like how can we justify to the German taxpayer that we are just educating and training Chinese nationals, right? And not even so many other people from other countries. So and especially since I discovered that some of the Chinese researchers are coming over on a talent plan or on a talent program, and we know about these programs that they are linked with knowledge and technology transfer. To me, that looks like a talent pipeline. So the second thing is that this is also a case where these knowledge and technology transfer structures become very visible because of the talent pipeline aspect, right? Because we train so many researchers here that may not stay with us. They just go to another country. They might go back to China, depending on how much money they are offered. But they may not stay in our system and contribute further to our system. So that's one problem, especially when you have 100% of Chinese nationals in your research group. The general things that I think matter are that we need to understand the dynamics at play. So when we look at the CISPA from a pure academic view, actually nothing is suspicious, because what they represent is a classic international career trajectory in academia that is just closely linked, unfortunately, with the PRC mandated knowledge and technology transfer. And that seamlessly integrates into our structures. But from an academic perspective, someone is right if he says, hey, you know, I got the best Chinese researchers because with them I can write the best publications, and my promotion here depends on the best publications. And this is how, unfortunately, our academic system works. So these structures the PRC has been building up since around 2017 seamlessly integrate with how we perceive international career trajectories in academia. The second thing is also, and I realized that when I was giving like awareness trainings here in Germany to organizations, is we do not have a very good understanding of the history, the structure, and particularly the purpose of the Chinese higher education system. The education system in China historically always served the interests of the state, or in the past, the empire. It was never neutral, and it had never the goal of just pursuing truth, as we see it here, right? Truth and science for the benefit of the larger society. This is not the case in the PRC. So when we look at research security and the current status in Germany, because it's like, you know, kind of two sides of the same coin, the CISPA scandal is a phenomenon that is tightly linked, in my view, with the current status of research security in Germany. We also have to look at this. So we could see like activities on behalf of the Federal Ministry of Research. The first visible one was in 2024, a position paper on research security. Before that, we had a minister who was really outspoken on China, Bettina Stark-Watzinger. And so that was initiated still under her, I think shortly before she left. Yeah, well, she left already. I'm not quite sure whether 23 or 24 when she left. But so she founded this, also this Department for Research Security we now have in the BMFTR. And so they have this position paper. They had the establishment of the Department for Research Security. They initiated a stakeholder process in order to, get everyone on board in this big thing of research security, because they didn't just want to impose something on our organizations or universities just by issuing guidelines. And then eventually, after the stakeholder process, they could agree on a certain number of key points, essentially, actually 2 areas when we look more closely in 2025, so by the end of last year. And these 2 key areas are the organization of responsibilities related to research security. So the organization of responsibilities, right? Not any guidelines or whatever, just the organization of responsibilities. And then the National Platform for Research Security, which is, as you can see here, supposed to be initiated in February next year. And this national platform is modeled on the Dutch example, where people, when they have questions, can just reach out to them and get more assistance and help and explanation. So it's a centralized platform to identify and assess risk and research cooperation. But what they say is mainly a guidance. It's not mandatory to follow up on what they say. So for me, it's like it's kind of an information point, right? So. And until today, we do not have any guidelines released by the ministry, and I don't see that happening very soon. So that's the current state. We don't have guidelines, and we have this national contact point in the near future, which is mainly assisting, but which does not hand out any instructive, of course, instructive information, but nothing that would be obligatory to follow. So, and then I also looked at the current debate, because my colleagues and I, we did a longer study on all the documents that were issued between 2020 and 2025 by various academic actors in Germany, who have all released like their own guidelines or whatever they call it, related to research security. Not specifically called research security, not in every case, but you can see they are related to this topic of more security in research. So we conducted this empirical analysis in 2025, and this paper is going to be published in a couple of weeks, hopefully. And we essentially concluded that there was a lack of recognition of, for example, because that's not conclusive, that's just a selection of our conclusions, that the extent of political control over the PRC education system and the constraints of academic freedom in the PRC and the soft power and influence strategies is not recognized in 90% of this output. The second thing is that also the extent of censorship and constraints on academic freedom abroad and risk of financial dependency is not recognized by 72%. And then we have the risk of military-civil integration that has also not been sufficiently taken into account by 70%. And lastly, the PRC's political system as a threat is only recognized by around half of the documents. So most of the documents, they talk about China. They don't even use the People's Republic as the right terminology. It's not specifically labeled as an authoritarian or autocratic state. So, and when you see all these blind spots already in the current debate, and then you see the lack of guidance on behalf of the ministry, I think we can all do the math and understand why cases like the CISPA can actually happen, because the entire environment in Germany is not conducive to any strengthening of research security by the organizations themselves. They do not have any incentive, and at the same time, they are also not under pressure. So to come to an end, sort of like my analysis for this case kind of looks like this. So we have media reporting that is a continuous reproduction of blind spots, in my view. Then we have the academic actors output that also has its own blind spots, massive blind spots. They together constitute the public discourse. And then we have the BMFDR output, where we can say, yes, there is some output, but we still have lack of authoritative guidance. And both together cannot really adequately inform decision making, which eventually leads to a fragmented, inconsistent decision making institutions, and eventually to fragmented and inconsistent security measures, if we can speak of security measures at all currently, in international research cooperation. So yeah, I think in total, except for the slide, I'm coming to an end. So in terms of what can we do in relation to effective policy making? In my view, effective policy making definitely requires a sober view of the PRC's political system. And we still don't have reached that point yet in Germany, in my view. So we need to clearly address the PRC for what it is. It is a one-party autocratic state. Terminology matters. If we don't use the right wording, I do not think people will understand the severity of this issue. The second thing is we need to understand the systemic dimension. It's important to understand that there is substantial influence on the higher education system in China on behalf of the CCP. Then we need to understand what science cooperation actually entails. Science cooperation is not just funded projects. These are like formal relations with the PRC institutions, but a lot of stuff that's actually going on is just between individual researchers, and that's what we call informal relations amongst different scholars of different nationalities, of different countries, and those normally result in individual publications. And then the last thing is we also need to understand the limits of self-regulation and the need for authoritative and clear guidance that is not country agnostic. Because what we could also see in Germany is that some documents clearly state, oh, we're deliberately country agnostic because we feel like, we cannot just finger point at one specific country. But I mean, let's be clear about this. China is usually the elephant in the room because no other country has such an elaborate system of knowledge and tech transfer structures set up in their own country to get the knowledge from our countries by overt ways, by covert ways, by legal ways, by illegal ways, and everything in between, so they can put it in their system and turn it into something commercial. And so I think we need to be very clear about what this means on the PRC side and in their policies. And then we need to understand that, we can try it with self-regulation, but we could also see how effective self-regulation was in business when it comes to human rights violations in supply chains. So in my view, sooner or later, there's no way around having something, having like mandatory guidelines in some way or another. Yeah, so that's all from my side. And
thank you, Alicia, for your excellent presentation. So I would now like to move into the discussion. You spoke about the importance of public discourse and media reporting, and it is important to accurately identify and communicate the challenges posed by authoritarian states and other security threats. The media plays a crucial role in influencing public understanding, yet there is still considerable room for improvement in Germany, as you outlined. And what changes do you see and would like to see in the way German media covers research security, and how can public awareness be strengthened?
Well, what I kind of observed was, so in the past we had like corrective mostly reporting on these cases of, controversial engagement. So for example, we had one big case at RWTH Aachen. This is one of our leading tech universities. We had another case we had two cases actually last year at Technical University of Munich. One was espionage, the other was just allegation of espionage, and this article is offline ever since because the researcher concerned went against the journalist, so now they got to deal with that in court. So essentially, the reporting on this case has been stopped, and I mean, I feel like Correctiv, they are like investigative journalists, they got some traction, but only since I think this kind of topic moved to Handelsblatt, it got more attention. And then I feel like, from my perspective, because I know the journalists from both outlets, it's I know how much Correctiv invests in a adequate understanding of the issue. And then I see the Handelsblatt article, and you could see my criticism of this article, and I feel like, well, as much as I appreciate really good media reporting, we need to have solid reporting, and it needs to be done by people who understand what the PRC stands for and better understand the science system and better understand the PRC science system. And this is not the case with the Handelsblatt journalists because their background was entirely different. And so I feel like, yes, media reporting is good. Obviously, it can move things forward and push things forward rather quickly, as we could see in the CISPA case and the timeline. But also, like when the reporting is framed in a certain way, like the Handelsblatt article and a stronger focus on espionage, I feel like we are misled by this and we do not understand what's actually at stake, like the transfer, which is going on for years and no one is doing something about it. So yeah, that's so much about the media reporting, and that's informing our discourse.
Thank you. And then at the individual level, what practical steps can researchers take to identify and manage potential security risks while continuing to engage in international collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to organizing the responsibilities, right, as our ministry said, I feel like we cannot just, put all the responsibility of the shoulders of our individual researchers. Researchers are not self-employed. They work in a large environment. They are employed by the university. The university itself has an interest in successful researchers, which they still evaluate based on their publication output. So I feel like there is at least a shared responsibility between the university and the individual researcher. And every actor has to do its homework. So for the individual researcher, of course, it's important to understand with whom you're dealing with. I sometimes talk to researchers and say like, oh yeah, but I'm working with this guy together for 20 years. And I feel like, yeah, well, this may be true, of course, but in 20 years in the PRC, a lot of things have changed, especially when it comes to regulation and especially when it comes to tightening the autocratic system. So it's great that you have these long-lasting research collaborations, but maybe you want to think about the pressure your PRC colleague finds himself or herself now under. Because what I could witness from 2015 onwards when I joined their system was maximum pressure for self-censorship, for massive publication output, no matter whether faked or not. It didn't matter. They just want to have the metrics. And then also ideological pressure that goes beyond censorship. So, and I think most people do not understand this because they do not understand the PRC science system is a very different science system compared to ours. And so what I wish for individual researchers is that they put a little bit more effort in understanding where their collaborator comes from what system and under what constraints they are operating. And then they need to kind of decide whether ethically this is an ethical question eventually, whether ethically they should still engage with this researcher or whether they endanger the researcher through their own research, right? There are many questions on that individual level. But then also, we shouldn't ignore the organizational level. And in my view, organizations like universities have a lot of responsibilities. They currently don't want, they don't want to show them.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, exactly. Like PRC is acting differently than like the European countries. And now, like with the many countries are still at the beginning level, like of developing research security policies. What lessons from Germany's experience could be particularly valuable for them?
Yeah, I remember like 2 years ago in a presentation, I did like some comparison of a few European Union countries and in European countries, so including the UK. So we do have, in some countries, we already have guidelines, right? The question is, are these guidelines sufficiently security oriented, right? Because some guidelines are maybe from 2020. They still have a different focus. They don't necessarily have a strong security focus. So definitely whatever guideline we have to make sure it has a security focus, because security is now in 2026. And after everything we know about the PRC engaging or supporting Russia in the war, supporting Iran in the war, security is most essential. So, well, as much as I appreciate individual countries coming up with their own guidelines, the problem is it's patchwork, right? When we then look at the union, some countries have it, others don't, and the countries that have it, there is no consistency when we compare these countries across the board. So what I wish for is that the European Union gets something out that is more consistent, that is sufficiently comprehensive. Well, of course, it cannot be mandatory because it's the European Union, right? It will be just a guidance. But if we had at least one consistent, comprehensive guidance, that I think would mean a lot. And then countries can still have their own guidance, which goes beyond that, right? That this is not the problem. But this should be the minimum base level we have across the union. Well, as we know, even if they would start with that now, it'll take another 3 years until it's kind of initiated. But let's just hope the union is doing something. And in the meantime, for the individual countries, it's very important to, and this is what I'm criticizing about Germany. Like, in order to come up with any guideline that is eventually effective to some extent, you need to understand the risk exposure of your universities you have in your home country. And no one is doing such an assessment. Like, I've been talking to the ministry and saying, like, well, but on what what kind of evidential base do you actually want to do anything in this country? You don't even know how exposed your universities are to potential espionage and technology and knowledge transfer, right? So without this kind of really basic research, I don't think anything effective can happen in any country, right? So first thing for any country is look at your education system, education sector, and try to understand the risk exposure. And when you've understood the risk exposure, you start coming up with some sort of guidelines. Yeah, so that would be my recommendation. Like, get the evidence in there first and don't do guesswork and start from there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alicia. We have now reached the audience Q&A session, and I can already see some questions. Like, first one is from Matthew Kennedy. Like, what Chinese organizations, in addition to the MSS, are focused on espionage activities against Germany's scientific and technological communities?
I think, wait, can I just read it? Yeah. Yeah, okay, okay, in addition to the MSS, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because honestly, in Germany, I don't know from where country you are, Matthew, but the thing is, in Germany, we don't do a lot of stuff compared to the US, for example, which has excellent documents from the Select Committee looking into things like that. We don't have this. So I know about 2 cases where the MSS was involved, but the pattern was different. It was not directly, like, not linked to researchers working at the university directly, but more like, recruiting them from universities to give like presentations, for example, in a later on, obviously, military setting. So these are the MSS cases, and based on my own analysis, the MSS cases, the 2 we had, are different to the knowledge and tech transfer cases we had. So, and other than that, I wouldn't know. Well, we do have United Front activities here. Obviously, they are very engaged in knowledge and tech transfer. To what extent this then also leads to espionage, I don't know, because honestly, our evidence here is so poor. We only have, around 6 cases over the 2 or 3 years that have been identified by journalists, and that is a very poor basis to start from with any kind of more structural insights. Yeah, so that's the only thing I can say. That beyond United Front, I wouldn't know who else could be behind such cases.
Okay, thanks. Next question from anonymous attendee. Like, as someone working at a large German university, I wonder how we can prevent the kind of knowledge technology transfer you have described at our institution and the associated reputational damage in terms of structures. We have an export customs unit. We have someone with knowledge of the Chinese educational and political landscape, working with university leadership. And we want to implement the BMFTR's key points, but without clear guidelines, laws it as an open question how we can and will proceed. In the current system, we want to continue working with partners in the PRC for the reasons you mentioned. I'm just wondering what your advice would be on to research institutions in lack of clear legal guidance from the ministries right now.
Yeah, so see, that's representative of the typical dilemma we are facing. We have research organizations or universities that definitely want to do something about it, but they don't have the guidance, right? So then they need to rely on their own like resources in-house to develop something, and that's costly and it will take time. And so the only thing I can say here is that because I've been approached by organizations in terms of what to do about it. And so my suggestion is the same, what I just said on a national level is if you are running a research organization or a university, you need to understand the risk exposure of your own university or research organization first. Why do I say this? Because originally my background is business ethics and risk management. And so no company ever would come up with guidelines without understanding their risk exposure first, because that's just ineffective, right? If you just like, let's hypothetically say like you try to form a working group and you want to develop guidelines. I can tell you already now these guidelines, well, they may be effective to a certain point, but because you've never looked at your risk exposure, they will not be able to capture the actual risk at your university or research organization. So I've been approached with like doing such risk assessments from the outside. I do a certain analysis to understand the risk exposure. I would recommend that to anyone doing this first and then starting to develop your own guidelines from scratch. And the first draft will never be perfect, but it will be a working document. And I would highly recommend to start from that, because what I know about German universities is, well, I'd be happy to see a university that is not vastly implicated in Chinese technology and knowledge transfer, and I haven't seen that yet. So if you want to have more conversation about this, feel free to reach out to me. I'm doing this. I'm doing such analysis, and I think that's still the best way to go forward. But I can understand your frustration because judging from the documents we have so far, even the documents from like Wissenschaftsrat or Leopoldina, these are all no instructive documents. And yeah, and I guess this will be the case for the near future. So if a university wants to do something on its own, they have to put in their own manpower and their own resources. I don't see any other solution currently.
Mhm. Thanks. So next question, for a good hire regarding research security officers at universities and research administration in Germany, what would your ideal candidate look like? Studies, experience, and etc.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question because that's actually a totally new job profile we hadn't had before. Just linking it back to the previous question, right? We have export control, and I always hear from the Americans, "Oh yeah, but Germany is really good at export control," and I feel like, okay, at least we're good at something, if not at research security, then at export control. So yeah, I think in my view is, I mean, research security officer is broad, right? It will be, I mean, this position will cover many countries, not just China, right? So, what an ideal candidate would look like, I can only tell you in terms of China. And then I say like, well, they really need to have a very good understanding of the education system because that's really crucial in that case. Other than that, yeah, ideally, that's what I know from my own conversations is people with an intelligence or military background, because these people are more sensitive when it comes to political systems, when it comes to security issues. So I would definitely watch out for people from intelligence, former intelligence and military or defense in these areas, and then just train them. The problem is we also don't have training material here. So this is a whole like, chain of issues we haven't solved in Germany. So again, linking it back to the previous question, even if you as a research organization or university want to hire someone as a research security officer, the same problem applies. We do not have the guidelines, the orientation, the knowledge from which we can actually then develop such a job profile. We need to, again, to develop it totally from scratch. Or alternatively, of course, we can look at like what are like the Canadians asking for, right? When they have job openings in this area. Probably I would orient myself towards that direction, like looking at open positions in Canada, in the US, in the UK, and the qualifications they ask for. So that would be my recommendation.
Thanks. And the next question, what practical policies and processes should be introduced and by whom?
Yeah, again, yeah, that's a question that falls into the area of how responsibilities should be organized. So in my view, starting with our government, I feel like it's the government's responsibility to actually come with some authoritative guidelines, as I've stated. And then, of course, the implementation is up to the university or the research organization, down to the lower level, to the individual researcher. The university needs to make sure the researcher has all the information available and actually, ideally, has also signed that they feel adequately informed to make informed decisions on their own, and they take responsibility for these decisions. I think a kind of how to put this, a kind of negotiated responsibility between the university and the individual researcher that is also made official and explicit through a contract would be really important, because otherwise, when you have a case, you cannot hold anyone accountable for that if you do not have this, right? So in addition to just policies, we also need a structure or a process for responsibility and tying responsibility to certain levels, the individual level, the organizational level, and people within the organizational level. So yeah, to break it down a little bit. So if we just leave out our government and just look at the meso level and the micro level of the individual researcher, it's like the university needs to have guidance and implement this guidance that requires to break this guidance down into practical steps. Similarly to what, for example, companies are doing when there's a regulation, they break it down in terms of what behavior is expected from our employees. Universities could do it in a similar way so that the information is sufficiently clear for the individual to understand and follow up on this. And then we need processes such as, well, we already have compliance, I guess. We have export control. We need more processes like screening, like background checks, regular checks of just publication cooperation, for example, because that's so implicit. No one would know about it, but there's a way to monitor this from the outside. And this would be essential too, in my view, to kind of prevent another scandal of, researchers collaborating with another defense university in China and no one in the administration knew about it, right? So things like that. Yeah, I hope like at least with that kind of answer, I could give you some more ideas. Other than that, write me, send me an email.
Yeah, the last question from the audience is what shape would the mapping of exposure take? Are we talking about a complete review of all cooperations with China across EU countries?
Yeah, I mean, that depends on who's kind of pushing for that initiative, right? If we have the European Union pushing for an initiative, I would suggest, yeah, maybe the union should understand the risk exposure of all European Union, like the most high level one universities. But I don't think that's necessary. Like, I would already welcome an approach by the federal ministries of these countries to say, like, hey, we want to understand risk exposure as a whole for our country. And we look, for example, at the first 30 biggest like universities and research organizations we have. And then from there, like if you have more time, if you have more capacity, if you have more resources, you can always go to the lower levels. But most importantly, like for Germany, at least the size of our country, I would say like, yeah, I would look at the top 30 and get an idea of their risk exposure when it comes to collaboration with the PRC. If I was in Denmark, maybe I'd say 15 universities, right? If I was in Sweden, maybe similar, right? It all also depends on the size of the country and the number of high-ranking universities and research organizations they have. So I wouldn't just say like, oh yeah, 30 is best practice. You always have to look at 30, right? That's bullshit. Like you need to adjust that to the country, to the kind of state of every country. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily see this at a European Union level. I don't think we need this, but we definitely need it at the national level for the sake of effective policy making on the national level. And we also need it actually at the individual level of organizations, research organizations, and universities, because they also should better understand their risk exposure because they don't want to be exposed in the next Handelsblatt article, I guess. So it's all about your own reputation and caring about your reputation, understanding that there's reputation at stake. If you're investigated by journalists for poor research security, right? Especially when it comes to taxpayers' money, I guess people get more sensitive about this. So yeah, that's how I would target that on the national level and on the level of the organization.
Yeah. So one question about like if you can also say something about like technological development as it becomes more strategic, like how should Germany continue to adapt its research security framework?
You mean in the context of technology or what?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to technology, it's important, of course, to collaborate with other countries to, yeah, well, to improve like technological kind of outcomes and successes and stuff. But then looking at the PRC again, I think we should be really careful in choosing our research partners, right? So and then, as I said, I wouldn't do it country agnostic. I would like when it comes to research in the area of technology, I would exclude certain countries from collaboration. At least when it comes to technology like quantum or other like really like future-oriented technologies that are also decisive, for example, in warfare, in defense capabilities, military capabilities. It's important to draw very clear red lines. So with technology, natural sciences, I see that we unfortunately need to limit that collaboration to certain countries and exclude other countries from that collaboration for, yeah, national security reasons, I suppose.
Yes. So the last question also from the audience. You seem to suggest that Germany needs to develop its own policies, processes, etc. But there is plenty of good practice across Europe, and the Commission is developing a center of expertise. Why can't Germany adapt the good practices of others to the specificities of the German system?
Yeah, I mean, of course, we don't need to invent everything from scratch. We already have stuff out there. Again, I don't know about these policies or documents. If they have a certain bias, like the documents we researched in our paper, in our recent paper, then I personally doubt this will be very conducive. Yeah, so if like hypothetically speaking, if these are like good documents that are not that have a sober view on the People's Republic, then of course we should work with them and see to what extent we can include them here. There's really no need to invent something from scratch when there's already good material out there. But my experience generally is that the understanding of the Chinese higher education system is not very good. I'd be surprised if it was any different on the European Union level because not so many people have seen that system from the inside and understand the workings of the system. Also, we do not have so many books or papers out there. We have some papers, speaking of censorship in the Chinese academic system, some papers I've been citing myself, but it's not that we have a huge pool of sources talking about the specificities of that higher education system. And unless we really understand how the system works, I doubt we can have any effective guidelines and any instructive, really good instructive documents on this. So, given that situation on a certain, not really say that adequate knowledge level on such a system, we have to see how we go forward. But in any case, yeah, I would wish Germany would go forward with something. And of course, for our own interest and for the interest of more consistency and cohesion in the European Union, we should definitely draw from these documents, no doubt about that.
Okay, so thank you, Alicia, for sharing your expertise and valuable insights with us today. I would also like to thank everyone who joined today's webinar and contributed to thoughtful questions and comments. Today's discussion has highlighted that strengthening security requires developing smarter approaches to managing risks while preserving the international collaboration that drives scientific progress. We hope you will enjoy us for the next event in the Research Innovation series as we continue to exploring national approaches to research security and the future of international scientific cooperation, as we did today with the focus on Germany. And again, Alicia, thank you very much for your excellent presentation and your comments. And thank you once again to everyone, and wish you all a wonderful day. Bye.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye, everyone.
Bye.